say your prayers. End times are here.
Great, just what we needed. Of course, nobody knows when or if the world will end, but lots of famous people have had very strong opinions on the subject. The Earth has outlasted some of these predictions, but not all of them. If you ever needed a bit of a downer about the future, just take a listen to the late Dr. Stephen Hawking. Hawking predicted the end of the world multiple times, or at least he believed there were many ways humanity could be destroyed in the future. There's global warming, for example. In the 2018 documentary The Search for a New Earth, the late physicist predicted that the Earth could become a gigantic ball of fire by 2600. And while that might seem like forever away, for a man used to dealing with time on a galactic scale, it presented a sense of urgency.
I am convinced that humans need to leave Earth and make a new home on another planet. To stay risks annihilation.
Hawking went on to warn us that we should be prepared to get off the planet within 100 years. That was back in 2018, so for those keeping score at home, that's now closer to around 90 years off. But that's not all there is to worry about. In 2014, Hawking said that we should be wary of artificial intelligence.
But I think the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race.
Hawking also advised us to stop sending out messages to try and make contact with extraterrestrials, warning, if aliens visit us, the outcome would be much as when Columbus landed in America, which didn't turn out well for the Native Americans. Not exactly a pep talk, huh?
With all due respect to Mr. Hawking, what the hell were you thinking?
The People's Temple is best known for the way it ended, with a 1978 massacre of almost 1,000 people in Jonestown, Guyana. By that point, cult leader Jim Jones had been preaching about the end of the world for decades.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Exactly how Jones thought it would all end depended on the day. He worried about imminent nuclear war, but also race wars and fascist takeovers. At one point, Jones pinpointed 1967 as the year that it would all hit the fan. Then 1967 came and went without planet-wide destruction. But that didn't faze Jones. He continued to preach that the end was coming, eventually moving his congregation to Guyana in part to increase their chances of surviving nuclear war. Well, when it comes to predictions of Armageddon, one name rises above the others. In several of his hundreds of quatrains, Nostradamus foretold the end of the world. At least we think so. Honestly, the guy's been credited with predicting everything from the French Revolution to Donald Trump to funny lines from The Sopranos.
You know, Quasimodo predicted all this.
Nostradamus. Quasimodo's the hunchback of Notre Dame.
Of course, when it comes to the cryptic scribblings of Nostradamus, it's way easier to interpret them in hindsight. And since the Earth is still spinning, it's anybody's guess what he's really trying to say. In fact, in 1990, some people pointed to a translation of one quatrain that said in part, "In the year 1999 and 7 months, from the sky will come the great king of terror. He will revive the memory of the king of the Mongols." Some folks certainly thought he was predicting the Gulf War to be the beginning of the end, but humanity survived that. But Nostradamus' most famous book, The Prophecies, included predictions up until the year 3797. Is that just where Nostradamus ran out of steam, or did he stop because, as somebody somewhere said sometime, the rest is nothing? You're not going to believe this, but Charles Manson had a method to his madness. Well, kinda. Manson was raised in a strict Christian household, but during his numerous stretches in prison, he was exposed to the Nation of Islam's interpretation of the Book of Revelation. All of this, combined with the apocalyptic feeling that was just starting to become part of the zeitgeist, solidified into a twisted theology all Manson's own. He preached that helter-skelter, a deadly race war, was imminent. According to Manson, black people would kill most of the white people on Earth, with whites turning on each other to finish the job. And Manson had a plan. He and his family would live in a pit until the killing was done. Then they would emerge to lead the remaining black population because, according to the extremely racist Manson, they'd be incapable of governing themselves. And he got all of that from a Beatles song about a roller coaster. But the race war wasn't happening fast enough for Manson, so he had his followers murder some white people and make it look like the killers were black to kind of kick things off. Not everybody buys this theory, but then trying to ascribe a clear motive to a madman like Manson is a pointless exercise. 20th century celebrity psychic Jeane Dixon might have been forgotten if not for one prediction she absolutely nailed. In a 1956 article in Parade magazine, she prophesied that a Democratic president would be elected in 1960 and then assassinated. And when John F. Kennedy was killed in Dallas in 1963, Dixon made sure people remembered that she'd foreseen the whole thing. Cynics point out that most of Dixon's predictions were big fat misses, like her visions of 3 of the Beatles being maimed in a horrific accident and the Soviet Union beating the US to the moon. But still, unless she was on the grassy knoll that day, she did nail that assassination one. Later in Dixon's career, she began predicting the end of the world. She said a comet would hit Earth in the 80s, causing massive destruction, but it wouldn't be the absolute end. That would take a few more decades. In her 1972 book, The Call to Glory, Dixon predicted that everything would fall apart around the year 2000, with nuclear war in the Middle East. Then in 2005, China would begin a quest for world domination, leading to years of war involving almost every country on Earth. There would be so many dead bodies that the resulting diseases would kill even more people than the nuclear bombs. And to top it all off, that's when the Antichrist would show up. According to Dixon, the final battle, or Armageddon, would come around 2020. It didn't. 2020 was a wild time, that's for sure, but hey, we're still here. Louis Farrakhan is the leader of the Nation of Islam, a controversial black nationalist group. He's been accused of spouting anti-Semitic beliefs, has said that the US government used AIDS to kill black men, and claimed 9/11 was a false flag operation. So it shouldn't be surprising that he also has thoughts about the end of the world. Back in the 1930s, the founder of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, wrote about a UFO, and Farrakhan claims to have seen it firsthand when he was abducted by the aliens. But while he was returned to Earth unharmed, the rest of us may not be so lucky. According to Farrakhan, the UFO will eventually destroy the United States. But don't worry too much. Farrakhan has been wrong about the end of the world at least once before. He was invited to visit Baghdad with other Muslim leaders in 1991, just days before Operation Desert Storm began. After returning home, Farrakhan announced, "This war, should it start in a few days, will be that which the scriptures refer to as the War of Armageddon, which is the final war. It will engulf the entire planet." Martin Luther was busy in the early 1500s. Most notably, he managed to jumpstart the Reformation when Christians moved away from the Catholic faith and started various new Protestant religions. One of Luther's most important contributions to this movement was translating the Bible from Latin to everyday German so that any literate person could read it. Luther believed 1000% that he was living in the end times described in the Book of Revelation. He was sure everything would go black before 1548 and that the Pope was the Antichrist.
You devil!
Guilty!
Luther believed that wars, storms, and the pleasure-loving younger generation would, and maybe should, bring on Armageddon. In one sermon, he said that the situation in Germany was so intolerable to God that if the last day didn't come soon, the country would be destroyed anyway, either by enemies or from within. But in other writings, Luther gave humanity a little more time, saying that the world might last another 100 or even 300 years. There were plenty of reasons people wanted to sail around the globe in the 1400s: money, prestige, adventure. But ushering in Armageddon? You wouldn't think that would be considered a good reason to risk your life colonizing far-off lands, but Christopher Columbus predicted he would bring on the end of the world with all of his exploring, and set off anyway.
That is a genius idea.
Columbus seriously believed that the world was coming to the end of its 7,000-year life, and he wanted his discoveries to result in Spain retaking the Holy Land, then bringing on the apocalypse.
Burn it all down!
Columbus thought that there were a few other elements needed to summon the end times, including the worldwide spread of Christianity and the discovery of the Garden of Eden. On his journeys, Columbus attempted to do both. Starting about a decade after he discovered the Americas, he put down his thoughts about all of this in his Book of Prophecies. Again, none of that happened, and he didn't find the Garden of Eden either. Isaac Newton is one of the most famous and most humble intellectuals of all time, even centuries after his death.
I'm Isaac Newton. I'm so smart. I love science.
These days, he's known for his academic achievements like inventing calculus and the whole apple falling thing. But Newton was also a believer in things that are considered a lot less scientific today, like alchemy and biblical prophecies. And his fascination with the latter prompted him to predict the end of the world. Newton was normally just interested in trying to decipher the cryptic meanings behind biblical prophecies. He was particularly obsessed with the idea of the Jewish people returning to the Holy Land, where he believed they would all need to be converted to Christianity before the world could end. But while his contemporaries were assigning dates to this occurrence, usually ones quite close to their own time, Newton was sure it was hundreds of years in the future. In fact, it was rare that Newton dated his predictions. There appears to have been one big exception. Twice, he wrote down his belief that the world would end and/or that Jesus would return in the year 2060. This belief came toward the end of Newton's life and was a notable departure from his earlier theological writings, especially since he seemed quite insistent that this was the correct date. According to Newton, the end would be preceded by epic wars and other disasters.
What the hell? Whoa, dude, it's raining crabs.
Stay tuned for that one, I guess. The western United States at the end of the 1800s wasn't a great time or place to be a Native American, as you might imagine, and their brutal persecution resulted in protest movements and apocalyptic beliefs.
I am speaking. Or has my medicine made us invisible to you? If so, you will not notice when I lead my people out of here.
The most significant was probably the second ghost dance movement, started by a Paiute tribesman named Wovoka, who went by Jack Wilson in white society, after falling into a trance and seeing that the end of the world would come in 1890. He envisioned a future where the ghosts of his people's dead ancestors would return, along with huge herds of buffalo, and the white colonizers would be driven out. The dances and prophecies of Wovoka terrified the white populations in the West. As the movement spread, colonizers struck back with violence, including the Wounded Knee Massacre. The original date given for this otherworldly return passed without incidents, but in 1894, a newspaper reported that Wovoka had a new prophecy. This time, the world would be destroyed by a flood of water coming down from the mountains and killing everything. Almost. Somehow, life would continue, and after plants and animals returned to the plains, the Native American tribes would as well.